Shout out to my Beat on the Street family. Beat on the Street. Thank you. The holiday parade has been canceled this year, so sadly, we just might be marching somewhere. We got to work on that. That's yeah. If you have a pro dance, if you want to join us in our pro dance, do your best with drugs. Dance troupe. Let me know. It's pretty non-judgmental, and none of us know how to dance. So we were confusing people in the electric light parade for 2 years, I think. Is that right? Turns out the downtown holiday lights parade, they don't have any judgment about whether you're good at what you do or not. And it's $35 to enter. And that's amazing to me. So we've been doing that for a while. My name's Dan Gibson. As mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of Communications at Visit Tucson. Visit Tucson promotes the idea of tourism to Tucson and then some other stuff that we do now and then as well. The main thing is to try to get people to stay in local hotel rooms. And my job is to get people to write nice things so people will stay in local hotel rooms. Among some other things, James Jeffries back there also works at Visit Tucson, is very, very good at his job. So whenever anybody talks about Visit Tucson to me lately, they're just like, oh yeah, I follow the Instagram. And I'm like, well, we also generate millions of dollars of economic impact, but sure, the Instagram. But James does such a good job that it overshadows the rest of the work we're doing. Liminal. So I said that I was a big fan of the word liminal, and then I started looking into it, and I realized I might be entirely wrong about what that meant. I've always just referred to it as just sort of this like purgatory of ideas, which to some extent it is. But the weird thing is that recently, because the internet is weird, liminal spaces are sort of hot in the digital arena. There's a Reddit group. Anytime anybody mentions Reddit, you should probably start this like drifting away, but called Liminal Spaces. And it's just people posting these sort of, what to me are more uncanny, the sort of like spaces that don't make sense or that feel sort of eerie. So I stole a bunch of those graphics. This Japanese artist, people are like, oh, it's so liminal, bro. And I'm like, no, it is that, and it is also not. Which is the best topic, where you can just talk about things. So this will be half existential crisis and then half discussion of Tucson's future. So something to look forward for all of you for the next 15 minutes. Yeah, it's entirely the same. That was, spoiler alert, that was the connection I was making. The idea of liminal came from this philosopher, Arnold Jennep, from his book Rites of Passage, which is the first usage of the term rites of passage. That guy was on fire with coming up with terms, two of which exist in our space today. But really, he said it was the energy in any system eventually dissipates. So whatever you're going through in life, at some point sort of just comes to a natural end because the energy for that ends. He was specifically largely talking about changes in life, but from teenager to adulthood, from childhood to teenager, all these sort of spaces. But it was just that something ends and then those energy must be renewed. It was picked up by another philosopher in the 1940s who sort of ran with it, and now it sort of pops up in interesting spaces. There's a church in town called the Liminal Church, which talks about their sort of focus is these in-between spaces, and there's a ton of it comes up a fair amount in theology. It comes up in architecture as the sort of spaces between hallways, really. How do you feel when you go from one space to another? So the preliminal, it's the assumed structure of something. You feel like you have it figured out. That's the space that you're familiar with and makes sense. The liminal is the ambiguous transition, and the post-liminal is your new affirmed state of being, where everything is amazing at that point. You've got it all figured out. It's been great. Until the catch is that might also be a liminal space as well. So do we possibly just transition from liminal space to liminal space? Perhaps. I don't know that there is that sort of certitude. So that's what's catchy about, troubling about this idea is that you may feel like you're in the in-between, but what is the next thing? How do you figure out the adjusted and transformed state of being? Hence the existential crisis. This is a diner from California, which is also a liminal space now. So define it how you like. Congrats, Reddit. The catch is that the other part of it is that there's a liminoid space, which is where you do not have the direction, you do not have somebody helping you walk through it, you don't have a guide through this transition, and you don't know that the transition has an end date, which is sort of the perilous part of it, right? Is that liminal feels great, like I'm going to the new thing. Liminoid is sort of trapped in this endless purgatory where there is no end date. And I don't know if COVID felt like that to anybody, or continues to. I would say it has gone from liminal to liminoid, where it just is like, well, we aren't entering a bold new thing. We are just entering this continued state of where we're at. Man, I'm a real upbeat guy today, sorry. It'll get better, there's jokes coming. So I mean, without a ritual of transformation, without some sort of like space at which you're thinking about being transformed, that's where you get into the liminoid instead of liminal. Liminal is that you have at least some sort of a plan. You live in that existence because you understand it and you welcome it. I grew up in the Baptist church, and this is the power team. So I'm uniquely terrible at these liminal spaces. This is really like what I'm learning, is that I'm uncomfortable with the in-between. And I think a lot of us are. But I think to some extent it's because I grew up in a space of faith. Now faith should be liminal, right? It really should be this idea of the yes but not yet, that there's something promising coming down the road. But what was challenging for me was that space when I grew up was all certitude. It was all certainty. It was like, listen, we got it figured out. It's amazing. We're killing it right now. We're waiting for God to come back, and that's going to be amazing too. And it's all figured out. And then there's this heaven where some of the uncool people aren't going to get in, and we're going to have a great time there. And there's the gold and all that stuff. And one of those examples, and I saw these guys like 5 times, was the power team. If you didn't grow up in evangelical culture, welcome to my nightmare. These guys. The biggest dude is the one in charge. I can't remember his name. But they would travel the country preaching the gospel, as they say. They played the TCC with 80s hard rock band Guardian as the headliner, 80s Christian rock band Guardian. And then they blew up like hot water bottles, like with their breath, because they were doing it because God. So this sort of thing just wrecked me. I'm not joking. I wish I were, but like, it was that they were like, it's all done, man. We got it. God's got this whole thing under control, and there was no ambiguity to any of it. It was just like, it's done. There's no mystery. We're here for this time period, and then pretty soon, Jesus is coming back, and he's going to fix all of it. And I don't know that I feel that way anymore, right? Like, that's an easy thing to tell a kid. Even then, I wasn't super buying into it. I went to a church that was on Columbus, and they had all these it was Roundup Sunday during rodeo. And if you invited somebody to be like, save them from hell, I suppose, you would get a licorice whip, like a really long, like red vinous licorice whip. You can see the theme as it goes. It's a Roundup Sunday, bring a guest, get some candy, save them from hell. It's all gonna work out great. And I never like bought into, I just was like, I'm not bringing anybody, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not going to talk about this to anybody. I'm showing up and I'm going to do it and it'll be fine. And so even now, there's this sort of like constant narrative in my head of like, well, how are we going to get, like, how's this gonna work out? You know, the sort of like, the precursor of, the caveman trying to figure out like what's going to eat them next is still the thing that runs my brain of like, okay, well, my boss is gonna say this, and then I'm gonna say this, and this is how it's gonna work out, and everything's gonna be great. And that's the worst that's liminoid behavior, right? Is the sort of, I've got this figured out, I can plan through it, and it's going to work, and the power team. I can bust a phone book, rip a phone book in half because Jesus. Turns out there's a trick to ripping a phone book, you bend the binding.
They really did that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They would smash their heads through bricks, like, oh man. The YouTube videos of the power team are hilarious if you weren't living it. Yeah. You're like, not awesome. But so, I think that's the challenge for me is like trying to learn to be more present in a space, like to accept that this transition is a thing that is happening and that some of it is uncontrolled, but like being part of a process of thinking about what this means and what the next part will look like. The power team was not that, so screw you guys. We would pass a Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket around to make money, so it was a whole weird scam. So speaking of ambiguity, our CEO is leaving for another place at Visit Tucson, so I get to live this right now, right? Like, I mean, it was funny that this topic came up because while there is ostensibly a plan and there's a way that this all is gonna work out, now we're in this weird transitional space. I think I'm really proud of the team that we've built in our corner of Visit Tucson. I think we do incredible work, but that could come to an end. Things change. Sorry, James, not to be morose. Yeah, James is like looking for the answer, hoping I have it figured out. But part of that is to try to live in this space too, right? There's a transition in power and maybe in direction of the organization, and maybe this is the end of a run, or that how things will work out. I'm really proud of the work we've done, but at some point, James is too talented to be doing this job forever. He's going to do something else. All of us might end up somewhere else, and that's a very weird and disconcerting feeling. But instead, I have to remind myself to live in this space and enjoy the work that we're doing, and that I get to work with these great people, and I get to do cool things in a city that I love, right? Love like a brother in prison. I'm aware of Tucson's flaws, but I will defend it to the end. It's not a romantic love. I'm well past that. Sorry. So that's the lesson I'm trying to teach myself. And to some extent, I went to a PR conference in New Orleans, and they had a speaker. I should remember his name. He was an anchor for ABC News, and had a meltdown on the air, like actually like a mental break on the air, Dan something, and started the 10% Happier thing, like the app and all this stuff. And I was sitting there listening to this guy, and I'm like, oh, this is one of the speakers that has nothing to do with what I do, so I'm just gonna sort of like sit here and look at my phone for a while. But all of a sudden I was just like, oh, right. He talked about this, sort of like secular meditation, and sort of like trying to figure out like how do you turn that voice off because it's a terrible friend. You would never be friends with the voice in your head, because all it does is panic, right? Like, well, what's that guy saying? I think you're gonna get fired today. I saw like the boss is wearing those type of shoes, or he's walking by your desk, or this is all gonna turn terrible. Maybe it's just me. This is the psychosis of my own head, but it's just to take time and like, I got this, we're fine. I have to tell the voice that all the time. It's just like, I got it, we're gonna be okay. We're just going, this is something that's happening. It's just happening. It isn't good or bad, it just exists. And so that's how I'm trying to navigate through these liminal spaces in my life. So David Foster Wallace, who I'm not sure we're allowed to quote anymore because there was some stuff about him being a creep, but I'm just gonna conveniently ignore that for a second. But he said, learning how to think really means learning how to exercise control over how and what you think. It means being conscious and aware enough to choose what you pay attention to, and to choose how you construct meaning from experience. Because if you cannot exercise this choice in adult life, you are totally hosed. And I feel like that's 1,000% true. It's not, it's so much the process of the choices you make about what you think about and the direction in which you want to take it. So does the life of a city include liminal space? Now we're transitioning to the second part where I talk about Tucson. I think it does. I mean, I think that's sort of a dumb question, I guess, now that I wrote it on a slide. But like, we go through these things. There is a yes but not yet, a no but soon element to cities as well. I think anyone who grew up here has sort of interesting perspectives on what Tucson looked like in the 70s or the 80s or even the 90s, and the sort of transition of how things look now. And I feel like I'm in a lot of rooms where people are like, yes, we did it. Tucson, we figured it out. It's better now. And the challenge of what we do, I think of as a Tucson, is that like so much of things are predicated on the new, right? Like what's the new thing that's happening? What can we talk about? Especially in PR. This is the sort of PR nightmare of like, well, this museum, it's been there since the 70s. You haven't seen it yet, so it's new to your readers. And they're like, well, yeah, but why now? Why are we talking about that now? It's not interesting unless it exists in some sort of new hook. And I have terrible news for you about Tucson. We are not good at new. And maybe that's okay, right? But like, it's funny because we were talking about like, with our sort of national PR team, just so pretentious, but like the agency we pay with money to talk about Tucson and New York. And they're like, so like just getting ahead of it. Like, what do you guys got going on in 2023? Like, what sort of new stuff is happening? I'm like, we'll get back to you. You know what I mean? And there's an element of that that's just a part of cities, but like, there is still a lot of work to be done. I'm jumping ahead on slides now, I realize, but would we even be able to agree on whether we're in a liminal state as a city? Would we even be able to agree on what the finish line of that is? Absolutely not. I worked at the Tucson Weekly, as mentioned before, and the sort of Keep Tucson Shitty thing was happening again. It sort of bubbles up every once in a while for understandable reasons. I think it was over whether Chris Bianco had a right to open a pizza place here, which feels so quaint now that we're like, I'm just like, oh yeah, that was a thing we argued about. My favorite comment from all of that was like, my pizza needs are met, we have Brooklyn pizza. And I'm like, Brooklyn pizza is great. Garlic knots are fire. I prefer Empire, but that's my personal preference. But like, we're talking about two different things, my man. Like, it's okay, you know. But that was the sort of attitude. And there was this sort of bubbling up of that. And we had like an argument about it. We wrote a thing in the paper. We had some sort of the Keep Tucson Shitty people talking about it as well. And I think that's the challenge, right? Is like, there is a group of people here, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, who are wistful for a certain era of downtown when there wasn't stuff happening here. There are also a group of people who will say, that the things that we have going on downtown are enough, like that we've gotten to a destination. I wouldn't agree with that either. Like, there's still a lot to happen. And those are the challenges that like the liminal space that we exist in a little bit at Visit Tucson. You know, the new hotel, the AC opening up has led to some other hotels opening up, and then what? It was a question, I guess. No, it's an open-ended question, but. So how would we know what the post-liminal state would be? This is a photo of Houston, I'm pretty sure. My wife was in a meeting the other day where people were talking about how Tucson could be the new Houston, which is a new one to me. I'm used to the Austin and Portland ones. But this was lovely enough, a consultant that Visit Tucson hired said Tucson could be the new Tulsa, which I was like, what? It was because they have a park. They built a new park. So great. This is what consultants are for. I dream, as an aside, of a day where I can just like say stuff like that sincerely. Like, just like, well, this could be the new this, and people have to listen to me, and I've already gotten the check in advance, right? I am 100% going to be a consultant working in the Aretha Franklin, you can pay me in cash up front space. Like, you guys can Venmo me real quick, and then I'll go talk. And then I'll just say some stuff like, well, I mean, you know, In-N-Out is the new Burger King. I mean, am I right? So that's the other part of that challenge. And so just as a point here, I am a white person talking about Tucson's tourism future and future in general. That is a not great space historically. I just want to point out, if you haven't read the book La Calle, they should hand it out to every Tucsonan because it talks a lot about that. Lydia Otero said the formation of the Sunshine Club, which is a precursor to Visit Tucson, marked a significant turning point in Tucson's history. Now the city's leader would favor tourism at the expense of more diverse industries. This is an ad from National Geographic in the 40s in which all of the ads were white people like by pools. And like, that doesn't work for anyone, you know, it just doesn't. And that, James and I talk about this all the time. It's just sort of like, well, how do we get to the next thing? And am I the right person to be making those decisions about what the next thing is? I think we do drive some of that by the language at which we talk about Tucson, and I hope we've done it for the better, but that's a point we should always be thinking about, right? I don't think that Roy Drockman and the like at that time period when they started the Sunshine Climate Club were like, hey, what we want to do is end up destroying a bunch of historic neighborhoods downtown and disrupt life for about half of Tucson's population. They were just trying to figure out how to get more money in this community. Like, they did it in a really shitty way. But like, I don't think it wasn't out of like a malfeasance, right? They were just like, we got to turn the corner on this thing. And I think I hear a lot of those conversations in this city all the time. That it's like, how do we become the next Houston? Well, how do we become the next Austin? How do we become the next Portland? I hate to tell you, first of all, I don't know that anybody wants to be the next Houston. I was talking to a TV crew and they're like, this is truly the ugliest city I've ever seen in my life. But Portland and Austin didn't do that by replicating someone else's thing. They became the best version of themselves, reflecting their community. Now in Portland, that might be bucket drummers and dudes with beards, I get that. But like, they reflected on what the assets they had and tried to make them better. And I don't know how we get away with doing a Tucson that doesn't reflect the changing dynamics of our city and our history, right? If you're over 30 in this town, you're most likely white. If you're under 30, you're most likely Hispanic. So our plans can't be just like this sort of endless, like bringing in businesses. Like, well, we got these guys, they came from California and they're doing a thing. It has to be a way that builds up the very character of what we already have. And I don't know what that is, right? Like, good on me for just like being provocative, but not saying what the finish is. But like, turning South 12th into some sort of celebration of the character of that space in which the people on South 12th get to own the buildings they operate their businesses out of is a lot closer to it than trying to attract another call center or trying to figure out how to get more people from California to move here. Now that's a fine end to itself. There are great organizations that we work with that are trying to bring more business here, and I'm not saying that that's bad, but we have to have a conversation about our future that isn't just driven by like retail politics of like more jobs good. You have to find an identity for your city. That's the challenge of this liminal state. Because the peril of it is that you have the liminoid thing. Well, this is it. We did it. There's a little bit more stuff downtown. There's some great businesses. And we do it too by talking about food all the time, right? Because it's just like, this is a thing that works. This is a place where we had successes. But what's the end of that? Are there young chefs in restaurants that are getting ready to open places? Do we have a burst of indigenous restaurants getting ready to open? It hasn't changed. We've promoted the things we have. We haven't figured out what the next thing is that celebrates this community. So I was reading a New Yorker article about, oh geez, I just said that out loud. Speaking of white people, the important thing about liminal states, I gathered, was that you didn't overstay your welcome. So we have to find ways to get out of it, like to have a plan to think about. It's great to be present and to be understood of what that is. James is gone. Shout out to James. Clap for James, he does a great job at work. I may do nothing better in my time at Visit Tucson than hire that guy, straight up.
10 a.m. meeting, Dan. Love you.
All right, see you, buddy. I just wanted to use a picture of breakers. Like, yeah, shout out to abandoned breakers. To some extent, I mean, like, this is a very like Reddit version of liminality, but it is also like, what did they do? Like, Breakers was hot shit when I was a kid. Like, that was a destination place. Justin's Waterworld is now an RV park where there's slides in, like, that they never took down. Breakers is just sitting there. Like, it didn't get better. It didn't adapt in any way, right? So at some point they stayed too long. So how do we make the next Tucson to be even more like Tucson? Again, this is La Estrella on South 12th, and I think that's the thing you have to figure out. And I want to be part of that conversation, but it's also just like, it just feels a little exhausting lately. I just get a little tired of like the conversation about New Tucson because it just doesn't feel like it incorporates the people who are going to make something out of it, right? So I welcome all of that stuff. I think there's a conversation to be about like, we've gotten somewhere about talking about all the great stuff we've done at Visit Tucson is all about like celebrating the things that make sense in this space. Don Guerra is famous in some sense now because he is very, like, he connects to the culture. He's doing something that revitalizes the grain economy, that feels especially like this place, right? I think Chef Maria was on Top Chef, is like, she felt like Tucson. So building more like giant ugly buildings filled with guys in suits, I don't know if that's how we get there. Shout out to guys in suits. You guys really are doing a great job with things. Man, it was more of a down note than I meant. This is what happens when you don't really have notes. This is what I'm doing. Adrianata is on Instagram, and it's like full of these sort of like surrealist millennial affirmations. And so I think about this all the time. I am not engaging. I am not reacting. I have astral projected to a Build-A-Bear. I use my power to create comfort. And this is my like mantra all the time now. It's just like, I'm astral projecting to a Build-A-Bear workshop. It's so nice. It's like, they asked me if I wanted to put a heart in my bunny. Like, what's ironic about that is if you have children, a Build-A-Bear workshop is the most terrifying place on earth. Like, holy shit, I just paid $70 for a stuffed animal. It's really awful. I'm a person that can be reached. You can yell my name into the wind, usually, and find me, but I'm on most things at Dan Gibson 520. Email me at work if you want, I don't know. Thanks for your time. It's amazing that anybody would come and listen to me talk. It's still very flattering. And thanks for Creative Mornings for letting me be here. You get it? You get it?
If you
oh, yeah, of course.
A few questions? Yeah. Anybody?
Oh, geez, this is terrifying. Yes.
What game shows and what was it like?
This is much more comfortable. So I was on Rock and Roll Jeopardy in 2002, which was or 2001, which was a VH1 version of Jeopardy that Jeff Probst hosted, which was very weird. Shout out, yeah. He is short and leathery, and he didn't wear a tie. I mean, it was just like cool. It was cool Jeopardy. I was on that and won money, and then I was on a terrible show called The Chair. Which John McEnroe hosted, and was not a show. Like, it was just, there's a 30 Rock thing about a
gold case.
Gold case. It was a little gold case. It was just like, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put you in this chair, that's the name of the show, and we're gonna throw stuff at you and have you answer trivia questions. Catch is, we're also gonna put you on a heart rate monitor. If your heart rate goes up, then you don't win any money. And I'm like, wait, why did I sign up for this? They threw roaches on me.
Oh my God.
And then I flicked one of the roaches away because I was like, we're doing a thing. And they're like, you cannot flick away the roaches. Like, the roaches had people, I didn't have people there.
Oh my God.
I did not win any money on that show because it was terrible. And then I was on a show called Motormouth, also on VH1. I don't know how I keep on getting these VH1 shows, in which I had my unsuspecting friend try to have him sing along to songs on the radio. Like, again, terrible show, like not even an idea. And we drove around Scottsdale in a van, and it was like, had cameras everywhere. And I was like, hey buddy, don't you want to sing along to this song? It's so much fun. And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I made $100, and then I went and ate lunch with that, and did not win any money. And when they aired it, they just like ran this stuff where they were making fun of us over the thing. And I was like, that's unfair. This is like, what? Like, it felt so unfair. And they're like, think about this, in his friend group, Dan is the cool one. And I'm like, hell with you guys. When's pop-up video on again? And then most recently, it was a show called Masterminds on Game Show Network, in which I lost to Ken Jennings. But I won $1,000, so that was cool. I beat the normal people and then lost to the greatest game show contestant of all time. So again, a little bit rigged. Game shows, the key is to be way more enthusiastic than your normal self. You get on there, the normal version of you will never get you on a game show. That's not against you, not you.
No, I understand.
The global idea. I tried out for Win Ben Stein's Money, and I'm like, I'm killing this game. I was like killing the trivia part, and they're like, winning. They don't want people, being good at the game is a sideline. The main part is to be this like 120% version of yourself, because once you get on camera, you come back to something vaguely normal. What they don't want is somebody who feels sedate, because then they'll be comatose once Pat Sajak is there asking them to spin the wheel. There's my game show secrets. That was what I was gonna talk about at Tucson Improv Movement. Shout out to Justin, runs Tucson Improv Movement. They got a show tonight. So you already heard the material that I was gonna do, so.
Are you on tonight?
Yeah.
Oh.
Too much Dan, everywhere in Tucson. Any other questions?
You brought up a good point about trying to come up with new content when either you're not totally sure of what the next thing is coming up. Do you have any tips, though, for people that have to do PR or create new stuff, like any kind of creative thinking that helps sometimes with that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, at least in what we do in PR, I think it's just to try to be as collaborative as possible. I know that's like the worst sort of cliche, but like, I feel like it got easier when I was open with people. I'm just like, this isn't a story. Like, it's cool for what you're doing. Like, it's great that you're opening this. Here's an example. The restaurant space is the easiest one, right? Somebody would send me a press release or be like, why aren't you covering my great Italian restaurant? I'm like, for people in New York, they don't care about your Italian restaurant. They've been to the ones in Italy, and they liked them better, right? Like, you're trying to convince, honest to God, sometimes people who've been to like Massimo Bottura's restaurant, be like, well, we got this great Italian place in Tucson. To me, it's always just like, well, what is distinct, right? I try to communicate to people how those, I'm very open about how that process works. Like, is that they are, like, when I talk to somebody at Condé Nast Traveler or whatever, they very much are like, why this thing now? Well, I talked to my editor and they like the idea, but they can't find the hook. And so, as perilous as that is, it's such a shitty way to like tell stories, like to be so focused on like the hook. But I think I just try to be honest with people. I was like, if you want to construct this thing, if you want to get a story in the Star, fine. Like, that's not difficult. But if you want to get, like, if you want that sort of attention, and in Tucson, locality is the hook. It's always going to be the hook. Is like, what makes your thing feel like the place? It's all terroir. Like, I mean, terroir is a word that doesn't apply to all those spaces, but to me, it's just like, Tucson food should taste like Tucson. We have to create a narrative that fits that thing. I think the other part of it is really, I can't remember his name. They make fun of him in the movie adaptation. He wrote that book, Story. And it's about film, it's like about narrative and film. But it's a really great book in that sense of like, where is the hero's journey in this thing, right? Like, it's not all Star Wars, but like, it's all like, you have to think about what was overcome. Like, what was the challenge? How did you get through it? Where did you get out of it? The heart really does live for that narrative. And I know it's difficult to put that into a new, like, Subway has got new $5 footlongs or whatever, but like, it's just, you have to be like, engaged with the idea of what humans want from stories. Right. And I guess that maybe it gets a little esoteric, but I think that's where the best stuff has come from for me.
Thank you,
Yeah. Justin?
So you said that you're not really sure what like is Tucson or whatever. So I guess my question is like we have like a really good food scene, right? And some of that's really connected to local, or people talk about like there's trails and there's outdoors.
Yeah.
But besides those things, like what potentially could be some of the things that could be Tucson?
It's probably a more like coalesced art scene might do it. Like something where it's like there's a place to go for that. I mean, I recognize there are museums and these things, but there aren't a ton of like art events to some extent either. And I recognize, I see your guys' press releases. I know there are a fair amount of art events, but there aren't ones that like resonate to the point of, say, Tucson Meet Yourself or something like that. Even Tucson Meet Yourself is a tough thing to sell nationally, but like, I'll get there. I'll figure out a way. I'm gonna get real coverage for Tucson Meet Yourself someday. Yeah. But like, we have so much outdoor street art, right? Why don't we have a street art festival in downtown where there's artists from around the world who are doing that thing, giant displays, and people are making art during the week, and then there's food and music at the end of it. You know what I mean? Like, why isn't there that? Birding, honest to God, like Tucson is one of the great places in the world for birding. Jared knows. But like, it's hard to sort of say how to do that. Like there aren't a lot of, like the Audubon Society does a great job, but there's no like, we're gonna take you to Madera Canyon and show you that stuff. The peril of birding is that you may not see anything, but like that's sort of how it works. Biking is probably that. We probably have the best assets in America of the combination of street, mountain bike, urban, road, mountain, gravel, of the sort of aspects of bicycling. There aren't a ton of tour groups. There aren't a bunch of bike rental places. There are some, but they're really terrible about marketing it, like just really straight up terrible. We don't, again, have like places to go. We barely have that with restaurants, right? I mean, to be honest with you, people are like, so where do I go for the city of gastronomy? You eat places, Mission Garden, Native Seed Search doesn't have a physical location anymore. Those are disappearing, right? Like what, Monique Lane and Randy Dorman are working on a thing on Broadway, which would be like a center for that. But like tourists in particular want to know where to go. Even Tucsonans want to know where to go. I am shocked. I think, I don't mean this as an insult, but this is a pretty insular community. We're all the sort of same sort of like people, right? We were at a thing for my wife's work and they're like, so downtown Clifton, where is that? And I'm like, it's been there for like 4 years. I mean, it's a real thing. Like to me, it's very like, of course that's where it is. There's a lot of Tucson that doesn't connect with that stuff because there's no entry point. The best thing about Tucson is that there's no entry point. Like you can just join something, right? There's no gateway to most things, right? We don't have like you have to be this cool to enter most of the time. The downside is there's no entry point because where do you start? That was a lot, sorry.
All right, big hand for Dan.